Welcome to the Jones Zone, a podcast by Darryl and JJ Jones.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Jones Zone. Today we have Nicole Pescara. She's the fire marshal for the city of Brea. Obviously, with everything going on nowadays with those wildfires that we just got through with, thank God, I thought, well, I couldn't have a better guest than a fire marshal. So thank you, Nicole. Thank you.
Happy to be here.
How long have you been a fire marshal?
I've been a fire marshal now for 3 years. So I have a very interesting story. I was working for the city of Orange and I got transferred to go work into the fire department. And I had no desire to go work there. I was like, I don't want to go work with these firefighters. I don't want to do that. No way. But they put me in there to do some clerical work, and I ended up seeing what a fire inspector did. And I remember asking the fire marshal at the time, I said, hey, how do you do that? I'd love to do what they do. It looks like a lot of fun. And he's like, oh, just go to Santa Ana College for a couple years and you could do that too. So I just finished my bachelor's degree in psychology at Cal State Fullerton. And I'm like, you know what? Let's go back to school. Let's do it. Went to Santa Ana College, did this, and I got picked up with Pasadena Fire. So that was my first department as a fire inspector. I actually grew up in Brea. I love Brea. Brea is my home. And so when I saw they had a position open, I put in for it. And so 2 years later, Brea Fire picked me up as a fire inspector. And I was there for about 6 years, spotted El Segundo open for fire marshal. And at the time, the fire marshal position was not going to be open for a while. I just knew it wasn't going to be something that I could do in the immediate future. So I jumped on the opportunity to go to El Segundo. So I was there for about 2 years, and that drive was terrible. I missed home. I missed Brea. Luckily, it worked out, and I came back to Brea about a year ago. So yes, 3 years as fire marshal, 10 years in the fire service as both an inspector, fire marshal. So.
What's the difference between a fire inspector and a fire marshal?
Well, the fire marshal is the boss. It's like the final level, right? That's that's it for me. I can't go any higher than this. So I basically manage the inspectors now. I manage the budget. I'm in the meetings. I'm dealing with developers as they're developing. A lot of the political stuff that goes on, making sure that the actual prevention bureau is actually running well. So that's my job now. Whereas as a fire inspector, you're boots on the ground. You're the one doing the inspections. You're the one out with all the new businesses coming in. You're doing the annual inspections, the apartment inspections, the brush clearance inspections, any kind of pub ed event. I help out with the pub ed events too, but my inspectors, I couldn't do it without them. They're the ones that are keeping everything moving and shaking.
So how many inspectors does a city like Brea have besides yourself?
We have 3 inspectors.
So fire marshal, and you have 3 fire inspectors. Tell us more. You talked about apartment buildings and commercial buildings and or retail. What exactly is the fire inspectors and fire marshal's role? It sounds like it's similar roles. You're just the boss.
Yes, it's a very technical position. So I like to joke that we're the cops of the fire department because we're enforcing codes. We're enforcing law. And everything we do comes from the authority of the state fire marshal. And so we have state mandate inspections that we're required to do every year. And those are like apartments, hotels, motels, schools, places like that, and high rises. We don't have a high rise yet in Brea. I know we have one coming, but we don't have one just yet. So we're not on the plug for that yet, as well as jails. So our little jail that we have at City Hall, we have to inspect that every 2 years. But everything else is on an annual basis required by state law.
Walk us through an inspection. What is you an apartment complex, or take anything that you just mentioned. What exactly is it that a fire inspector does?
So typically they're going to look at the outside first, and then we always work top to bottom. So the exterior, we're looking at fire access. Are you parking in the fire lane? Do you have a fire lane? Are you obstructing hydrants? Are you obstructing our fire department connection? Is the address visible? Can you do any of the exits from the exterior look like they're obstructed? So those are the kinds of things you want to check on the outside. And then you're going to actually go inside and make contact with the property owner, property manager, whoever is the business owner, whoever is in there, right? And you're going to walk with them and you're going to explain to them what you see as you go. So you're checking everything from fire extinguishers. Have they been maintaining their fire sprinklers? Have they been maintaining their fire alarms? In apartments, have they been testing the smoke alarms? Things like that. So making sure exiting's good, stairwells are clear, the doors are closing and latching in those stairwells. Those are typical things that we're looking at. Any kind of electrical hazards.
Now, you mentioned fire hydrants because oddly enough, I live across the street from a fire hydrant. And it had leaked. It's not in Brea. And it had leaked. Does the water department have something to do with that?
Yeah, Public Works Water Division. They're the ones that handle our hydrants.
Okay. And they handle, so that's not even something you'd even need to check.
No, we do. If they are private hydrants, they do have to be tested and maintained. And you can tell in Brea if it's a private hydrant because it's painted red. It's called OSHA Safety Red. And so if it's red, that means it is a private hydrant. If it's the green and silver, it's a city hydrant.
Interesting. Someone can put a private fire hydrant in their near their house.
Yeah, well, typically you see them. I haven't seen them in too many homes. I think it would be a compromise to have to do something like that in a residential, but typically in a commercial structure, if they have a very large building they're putting in, they may have to add an additional hydrant maybe on the back of the property because there's not enough length to their closest distance to another hydrant. So that's kind of the logic behind it. Is it's usually required if we don't have enough hydrant access because of the size of the building.
You know, it's funny. My wife was talking about how we have sprinklers inside of our house, and
Mhm.
and we thought, and I figured, what the heck, I might as well ask you, why aren't there sprinklers in the exterior of homes, like on the roof lines? And this is kind of, I'm sorry for my naive question. Is there a reason why they're not on the outside?
It's a great question. Absolutely, there is. Well, first and foremost, the sprinklers in the homes are designed to be life safety systems only, which means it's only to get you out of the house. You have about 3 minutes, the way furniture is made these days, to get out of the house safely. And that sprinkler system is going to buy you time. It's not meant to extinguish the fire. It's not meant for anything other than to get you out and make sure that you're alive. That's the only reason for it. So they make it that way and they make it cost effective so we can keep it in the code, because there's a lot of building developers that don't want them because it's an additional cost. So that's why they just try to make it very, very cheap, very low maintenance, life safety system only.
Okay, you know, it's a friend of mine actually. We were talking about, or I was going to talk about the hills in Brea. Of course, Brea is adjacent to the hills, and all these areas, Yorba Linda, Brea, La Habra Heights, all adjacent to the hills, which I'm guessing is well, not guessing, it is a high fire hazard area. And a buddy of mine works at I think it's Lynn Energy, the oil company.
It's Bridge now, yeah.
Bridge, yeah, they've gone through 5 million different.
I know
owners.
they've changed names so many times.
Yeah, well, but it was funny because in around 16, 17 years ago, they had the brush fire along those hills. And I was talking to him. I said, you know, gosh, you guys are so, I mean, you've got explosive material. He talked about they have some sort of foam system that goes over their really sensitive areas, and it can be very explosive. I don't even know if you can speak to that or not. And I said, well, why don't they have that at homes? And he said, well, it's only for emergencies, and it's also maybe not environmentally friendly, or I'm putting words in his mouth, so don't quote me here. But why, I mean, after all these massive fires that we've had in LA County and everything, which was just obviously horrible, is there something like that one could install in their house on the exterior to save the house? Not only, of course, saving lives is most important, but
yeah, so that's a great question. What they have at Bridge Energy is something extremely expensive. It's very much meant for the hazards that they have there. They have two giant tanks that are out there. One's with propane and the other has a NGL, natural gas liquid. And they have a deluge system, which actually dumps a bunch of water on those if those were ever to erupt or catch fire. And then they have what they call monitors, and they look like little hose cannons, and they have that are pretty neat, and they'll set those off too. But the foam typically is for the hazard of the oil and for those types of hazards. It's designed for what they have going on there. The home, the best thing that you could do for your home is to harden it. And people, I'm glad we're talking about this, especially because home hardening is where it's at. And I can tell you, since these fires have hit, my job has been very hard, and people are calling me, asking me why I'm not doing things, and telling me I'm not doing enough. And I want the people to know that I can only do what is required by the code. And what the code only requires is for defensible space. That's 100 feet from the structures. You have to have that defensible space in the wildland areas. But other than that, my hands are pretty tied, and we have a lot of other state and federal regulations that tie our hands too. We have the California gnatcatcher and their mating season, and we have native plants, and we have a frog, and we have all these things that are protected in that area that people don't realize. So we can't necessarily just chop stuff down and cut the whole hillside and do all that. Or if we do cut the whole hillside, then you've got mudslides that can happen, as we're seeing right now with the rains that we just had. So when it comes to that stuff, there's only so much we can do. And then if you have a windy day, you also are going to have embers that are going to come travel over a mile anyways. So is that the best solution? Is cutting down all the hillsides? Absolutely not. It's hardening the home. And that is taking the steps to meet what they call, it's in the California Building Codes, Chapter 7A. And it's basically a non-combustible construction for your home that are in these areas. And studies have shown, science-based, they've done several tests, they've had firebrands thrown at these homes, that if you harden your home, your chance of withstanding wildfire is almost 100%. I don't think they can ever guarantee 100, but if you see the fires, the ones that survived these last fires, the homes were hardened.
Well, speak to that. I hear harden the homes, and I'm thinking of different things that one would do, but let's get specific. So what do you mean by hardening a home?
Yeah, so there's multiple stuff you can do, like having non-combustible siding on your homes.
So that's specific. It's funny because I just actually spoke to my wife, because she knows I'm doing this podcast with you, and she saw this ad on Facebook for fireproof stucco. And I actually talked to the gentleman yesterday. I'm supposed to talk to him later. But my point, though, is things like that is what you're saying. So,
yes.
Okay.
Something like that. I had a gentleman the other day, he emailed me asking me if he could just spray fire retardant on his home. And I screenshotted the part of the actual specs that say it has to be on, like, not painted, not treated, nothing's been on, it's like fresh wood, not a house that's been built. It's not going to be effective. And so I just kind of sent him that. I said, this isn't going to be effective. Your best bet, harden your homes, And so your attic vents, they have a mesh that you can get a smaller dimension. I can't think of it off the top of my head. I think it's like 1/8 an inch, but I'm not sure. You don't quote me on that dimension. But having the attic vents having the smaller mesh, so it's harder for the firebrands to go through. And then, but yeah, it's that non-combustible construction. If you have and the Class A roof, all of that stuff. So it's a combination, but really it's just designed to be non-combustible. So it's not going to catch fire, and it's not going to give those firebrands a chance to really get into the attic space and take off.
From what I hear, the attic space is typically the cause of when these brush fires happen. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say, yes. And I actually was talking to a good friend of mine. He's a firefighter at LA City yesterday, and we're working on an invention. Let's see if it happens, but we have an idea. I can't talk about all the details just yet, but we are working on an invention to hopefully help with that as well. So I'm sure it's going to be years in the making if we do get there, but we just started talking about it, and we're going to we're looking for an investor right now to start working on it. So it'll be really neat if we're able to develop that.
Wow, that sounds really neat.
Yeah.
So on that note, is there, other than your incredible invention that's going to make you a billionaire,
I could retire?
yes, are there any things on the horizon that other people are working on? Is Elon or Bill Gates? I'm just kind of kidding there. Do they have any ideas on what we can do? I've always thought, well, I tend to do this. I ask five questions instead of letting you answer the one. Let me just go ahead and stick with that. Anything on the horizon?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. So there's some really neat technologies that are out there. And one I've actually proposed right now. I proposed it to our mayor, and they're actually looking into it. They're going to be doing a meeting actually in a couple of weeks here for a demonstration on it. And they have these AI cameras now that you can stick out, like we can put them in the canyon. And they're going to be able to catch that fire faster than anybody else is, and it automatically is going to call and report that fire. So it would be an early catch of a fire. Really neat technology. OCFA had a save with that not too long ago. I think I saw them posted on their social media or something. So these cameras are kind of cool. And granted, it's not the preventing the fire, but it's catching it in its earliest stage. And I think that's something we need, right? Especially if we can't just cut out hillsides because of the gnat catcher, because of the native plants, because of the state, we call it the SRA, that state responsibility area. So that's something that I'm hoping that we might be able to get here in Brea. It's not cheap, of course, so we, of course, will have to try to look for funding on it, but it's something that we're looking at. Also, they have these giant like water sprinkler setups. I know they've shown some on the news lately. They have some pretty big water cannons. The helihydrants we're hearing about, or they put the giant tubs of water out on the hillsides for the helicopters to use. So that's the kind of stuff that we're hearing about right now. I'm going to a conference in March, and I'm sure there's going to be a whole bunch of new technologies to see and hear about when I go there. But those are the ones that I know of.
Stucco's not exactly very flammable, so that's probably helped. I mean, in the last 60 years, moving from wood to stucco. Is cement and stucco the same thing? Excuse my ignorance on that.
I don't know if it's the same, but cement is definitely non-combustible. It's not going to contribute to the fire.
You see commercial buildings. There, a lot of them are made with cement. Why aren't houses made with cement? And maybe you don't know the answer. I'm guessing cost prohibitive.
Yeah. What people don't realize is a lot of our codes are driven by the industries. So the wood industry and the concrete industry and all of them have their say. So if they have really good lobbyists, they're able to keep codes the way they are. But remember, homes are meant to be, especially in California, we've had a lot of legislation passed that they want homes, right? We have a housing crisis. We need more homes. That's why ADUs, we had a bill go through that we can't require sprinklers in ADUs, which kills me because as a fire marshal, I love fire sprinklers. That's one of those bills that passed because they're trying to get these to be built quickly and to have them be cost effective. And so it's just battles that we haven't won that we continually try to fight when we're putting in for codes and lobbying for codes. But some of these people are heavy hitters. They have some really, the more money they have, they're able to throw at making sure their codes get in there or making sure that the codes aren't super restrictive. And granted, California is one of the most stringent codes in the world, but even still, we have battles that we lose with some of those big companies.
Now, if you're a queen for a day, queen for life, whatever, what would you require? I mean, so there's cement, it's non-combustible. Is steel or metal, is that even better? Is there something that would be just if someone said, hey, I'm going to make this building and I need to make it completely fireproof and money is no object. What would one do?
I would do concrete. I'd probably go with a concrete home, fully sprinklered, but everything to 7A standards. That would be to me the perfect home to withstand a fire. And anywhere, especially the wildlands. You saw with these fires, because of the winds, it went past where the actual wildland areas were. It went way past. It actually went into the residential, into the city more farther in, and that just shows you that it's not just a wildland problem anymore.
I had a friend of mine who lost his house in the Yorba Linda fires 16, 17 years ago. And he was describing to me, he said, Darryl, we looked in our backyard and we saw a wall of fire and we didn't even have time to get in our car. They lost their cars too. They ran out of the house. So what I'm getting at, how fast, I guess the fire can travel as fast as the wind travels? Is that, if it's, on a windy day, or is it making sense at all?
It's so the problem is there's several things. You've got the fuel, right? So it's going to be consuming that fuel. And then once it gets to the homes, they call it conflagration. And I believe that's the term. And it turns into just consuming the homes and jumping from homes. But it's the firebrands, the little tiny embers that are causing the biggest problem. Those little embers are getting into everywhere. They'll get in there and they will just take out the attic. They're going to take out, additional homes in its way. So, and
once the attic's done, in fact, had someone, I think it might have been the gentleman I was speaking to yesterday, or someone had talked about how an ember can actually get into one's attic and be there and not even start a fire for days.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true?
Absolutely correct. And so interestingly enough, like one of the theories that we're hearing about the Palisades fire is that they said it was an old firework, right? From I think the 4th of July. Did you hear that theory?
I didn't hear that
Oh
theory.
yeah, that was one of the theories that's out there. And it was in that same area where the fire happened again. So it's very likely, it's very possible that there was embers that were just chilling there and those winds were roared it
Of
up.
course, chilling might not be the right word, but I get what you're
Definitely
saying.
not the right word.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean.
Right. Well, seriously, so a hot ember can go into an attic and it can just live there and just fester. It just sits there and
Yeah.
it's tiny and you can't really detect it. And then typically what causes it to ignite? Some oxygen or just we don't know or
It's typically it'll smolder, and it's depending on what's in there and what gets to it. It could be a draft that gets it going. It could be what's being stored in there. There's many different factors that it could cause it, but yeah, it definitely can just sit there and smolder and hang out, and then just decide that it's gonna wreak
it
havoc
could
on your
chill.
home one of those
It could
days.
chill there for a while.
It's gonna chill.
Yeah. Oh goodness. So I'm guessing that there's been a dramatic change in insulation, and I know roofing. Of course, we can't even sell houses with wood roofs any longer, which is great or fine. I mean, my goodness, those roofs are like matchsticks sometimes when they're old enough. But I'm guessing there's been in the last 20 years or so. Can you speak to any sort of the developments that have made these fires less likely for not only wildfires but house fires?
Yeah, so the code's ever changing, and every 3 years we get a new code. And the biggest stuff has been for those that are in the wildland. So those that meet the criteria of the high fire severity zones, they're the ones that have to meet those standards in 7A, which I believe came into effect back in 2010. 2010 is when those came into effect. And so we're seeing things kind of grow and change as the technologies go. The codes typically go with the technologies. So another thing we're battling right now a lot is with the energy storage systems and the solar panels, because that's ever changing, right? And like the Tesla solar roofs and all of that stuff. So it's a constant battle with technology and then the code trying to keep up with it. But things have been relatively, I would say there's been minor changes, but they have been relatively the same since 2010 when it comes to residential construction. Now, commercial construction seems to be getting more stringent and have a lot more requirements. Obviously, you have to meet ADA and all kinds of other green codes and the building code and mechanical code, electrical code. There's a lot that falls under commercials, whereas residentials really are a lot less regulated. So that's kind of it'll be interesting to see now, especially after these fires. I think we're going to see a lot of bills come through that are really going to change one that's been proposed in the past that I foresee might happen now after all these fires is a retroactive requirement to harden homes. And could you imagine being a homeowner and being told all of a sudden you just got to spend thousands of dollars to go harden your home? And you're like, well, I don't have that money, or how am I going to do this and meet that requirement? So it'll be interesting to see what comes of this. I wonder if that might be one of them. We are actually trying to look for grants that are available to actually help people harden their homes. So I do hope that we're able to secure some of those once these grants start opening up. We actually just got an email today that the Trump administration froze the grants. So I was just putting in for one. I actually have a meeting after this about a grant I was working on. So it sounds like all of those have frozen, at least for the time being, while they just look to see. I guess they're doing investigations as to how this money is being granted and what it's for. So we'll see if the grants that I'm putting in for will carry on, and if there's going to be new grant funding that's going to come out specific for those that live in the wildland area.
Now, speaking of wildland, and you talked about the home specifically, making the screen a little bit more smaller holes. My goodness, I could say that in layman's terms there, and then encasing your eaves. Is that another thing that is done? A fire retardant roof, fire retardant materials. What about plants? So if one could put whatever plants. I mean, I grew up. I grew up. Oh gosh, I used to play at Fanning Elementary School. They had ice plant. You know what ice plant is?
No. Mm-mm.
No, okay. Because it's funny. Growing up, there was so much more ice plant when I was a kid. It seemed like because ice plants are kind of like a cactus, but no thorns. It's very thick, very full of liquid. I mean, it's got to be a great plant for that can't burn. I mean, I don't think you can burn that stuff. I mean, it has to be pretty intense. But in any event, what plants are least flammable?
Well, this is a great question. We actually have on the website under fire department, if you look at our guidelines, we have something for fuel modifications. If you look at the approved plant list, it's the last, I think, 2-3 pages of it. It has plants that are not good, and then it has plants that are. I could tell you a lot of ones that aren't, like pine trees, eucalyptus.
Well, tell us what aren't then.
Yeah,
Since that's on the top of your mind.
Eucalyptus, no good.
Well, what's the site? Our viewers can maybe go on this site rather than you recite everyone. What's the name of their site?
It's cityofbrea.gov. And if you go to the fire department and go to the plan submittal guidelines, you'll see the fuel mod for new construction in high severity zones. You can reference that to try to do your best at making that happen.
Now, is it fair to say that maybe the best would be to not have any trees, or can trees actually be a barrier?
You know, I think some trees just aren't going to be a problem if you get the right kind of tree. But like with anything, if you've got to maintain your landscaping, because not all trees are going to be green year round. And I mean, if you're watering them, that might be good. But it's all about how you maintain your landscape as well. So making sure everything's still green and everything's good, and making sure you have those plants that are not going to really contribute to the fire. That's going to be your best and safest bet.
Because we saw this horrible, the Pacific Palisades and the other areas. And the only thing that was remained were some trees, oddly enough. So just thought, well, heck, that might even be a barrier. So
stay tuned for part 2, where Darryl discusses with Nicole about the most common cause for house fires. Only on the Jones Zone.